recording.
Okay.
All right, you guys, I am here with my dear friend. Her name is Makenna Francis. I've known her for a long, long time, but the reason that I wanted to have her on the show today is because she is a nurse practitioner of psychiatry. So Makenna, would you say hello to our listeners?
Yes. Thanks for having me. This is the first time I've done something like this, so kind of excited. Hi, everybody. I am a nurse practitioner. My specialization is in mental health psychiatry, and I practice here in Arizona.
Not only does she practice in Arizona, she has some really interesting like passions, and that's really why I want to talk to you. Okay, so you TacMobility people, you know that I've got the law enforcement cumulative stress survey on the website. And if you don't know about this, then you need to head over to tacmobility.net/surveys, and you can take any three of the ones that are posted on there. But what I found really interesting, or actually not what I found interesting, but what I wanted to get from people was their perspective on medications, because it seems like people don't understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like people don't really understand the purpose of medications. From what I'm reading, as far as like why people are hesitant, it's very different from the way that you've explained how medications work entirely. And so I just want to like clear some of that shit up right now, and and make like resources available. I feel like medication can be a really good resource for people. So like tell us why we're getting medication wrong. Like what don't we know?
I'm so glad that you brought this up because it's such, and I think the word that we can use is stigma. I mean, people are afraid to say I'm on medications, or there's some sort of, I don't know, crossing over to the railroad track into thinking, oh my gosh, I might actually be using medications for my mental health. And it's really unfortunate because, I think quality of life can be enhanced greatly. That's the purpose of these medications. My job and the purpose of meds in general is just to improve quality of life. And it's really unfortunate that that's almost like a last resort for a lot of people that will go to the complete depths of suffering before they would even consider taking a medication. So
Mm.
I love that you're doing this. This is
You
really
said
great.
You said suffering. Okay, because the surveys are anonymous, as in I don't get to see who is responding to these surveys or who's completing them, but I do get to see the actual answers. And McKenna is a trusted medical professional. So I've shared with her some of the responses. And I even sent one to you last night, and your response was like, damn, there's so much suffering. So like, why is it that we like, I guess I don't understand how, like how do we change how we view medications? Like what do they do and why do we need them?
Well, speaking of your crew that you're speaking to specifically with the police force, I actually have several officers who have come to me as kind of a last resort. They've been having symptoms of PTSD for years, and it's impacting their function at work. It's impacting their function at home. It's impacting how they feel about themselves and life, and them even wanting to be alive. And it's the last resort because, I mean, this might not be true for all departments, but they have to fill out a form. And a lot of companies do this depending on what type of profession it is. They have to fill out a form stating what medications they're using and why. And I don't know, for some reason that they feel like if they turn that in, they are going to be treated differently or looked at differently by other coworkers. That's really unfortunate, but I think that might have something to do with it, um, being a last resort because of how it's going to look, because that does go down on paper for some departments. But I don't. You might know a little bit more about that than I do.
Well, that was so I'm trying to pull up probably should have done this before we got on the phone. Um okay, so I wanted to kind of go over some of the answers to why or how people feel or how officers feel about medication, just so everyone can not feel so alone in their in the way that they feel about it too. But then also, like, let's maybe come up with some different solutions. Okay. So I had 24 responses about the question was, what are your thoughts on the use of prescribed medications for chemical imbalances? Not interested. Don't want it. There's someone that currently takes it. Someone's concern is that if you're involved in an officer involved shooting, the courts and the public would use that information against you. Um, there's an example, one of their guys got into a shooting and his toxology report came back with his ADD medication, and the family sued him and publicly shamed him, stating that his Ritalin caused him to be aggressive. That's I have chills right now. That's ridiculous. Why is that ridiculous? Like, how does, okay, I'm gonna write this down because I want to know more about how Ritalin works, because I've changed my perspective on that too. Not sure it would help, never want it, don't like it, should be allowed, not for me. I would prefer alternatives. I think it's a crutch, not for me. Hell no, not with carrying a gun. I wouldn't even ask. Not a fan. I don't know. I think they're awesome for the general public, unsure for those that are sworn. I don't like the thought of taking any medications. Those are just some of the answers that I'm getting. Are these pretty common responses for most of the people that you treat, or is this kind of unique?
Well, just to be clear, I'm not pro medication. I am pro not having debilitating symptoms that cause you to um, question your ability to even want to be here in the first place. I am against depression that's causing you to not want to get out of bed in the morning. I'm against debilitating anxiety. That's what I'm against. Medications sometimes can be a really effective way to target those things if they're indicated. They might not always be. So I think that having that middle ground and being a little open-minded, not saying no, absolutely no, I would never consider these, but allowing yourself to be, not wanting to be alive any longer or raging at your family members. I mean, let's be a little in the middle there with those thoughts. And I think that I might need to pause for a second. Oh, there's a baby next door. I didn't know if it was mine or there, but it's the baby next door. Sorry. Yeah, edit that part out. So as far as why, I don't really get a lot of that from the people I see, because remember, the people that come to me, it's actually pretty surprising that by the time somebody ends up in an office for psychiatry, this is their last ditch effort at quality of life. It's not like, oh, I'm not feeling well, for the last couple of weeks, I'm going to go make a psychiatry program. These are people that years and years and years of suffering before they would even consider this as an option. So to answer your question, no, I don't really get that from people, because they're like, this is it, either this or
like,
I'm like, I'm like, oh, no pressure. They're like, meds or I'm calling it. So, I mean, not always, but more often than not, people don't think of this as a first line of options. So yeah, I don't really hear that as much, but I do see that from people until they get to that point, like, I'd have nothing else. Then they'll look into medications, or someone in their family will say, please, go ask.
God, get this medication.
Yeah.
Something that you posted, which, okay, you guys, I would recommend, if you aren't already, I've reposted her stuff a couple of times, but her Instagram, she's doing something that I have never seen before. So if you follow her on Instagram, it's psychiatry_MP. Is there
Underscore.
And then
At the end.
Okay. Psychiatry_MP_. So she's out there sort of dispelling some of the myths around mental health and how medications play a part of that. So like she said, which is why I love her so much, her focus is not necessarily medication, but she's against all of the other things that are making our life feel so bad. So she had posted something once, and I really loved that you did this. It was like, and I've had the same fucking argument. Like, I and like my crunchy ass holistic fucking self was like, I'm not gonna do medication because it's really bad for your body. And McKenna posted something like, yeah, well, do you know about the negative effects of depression and anxiety? Mind blowing. I had never ever thought about it like that.
Yeah. And I think that's so huge for people to understand, is that they would rather feel depressed, which is the number one debilitating illness in the world, causing them to maybe take years off of their life. Depression is so harmful on your body. It will cause you to have heart disease, high cholesterol. I mean, the list goes on. That's well documented. We could talk all day about how bad depression is for your body. And people would rather feel those things and expose their body to depression and before taking a medication with some potential side effects that they might not like. That's kind of surprising to me. Um, Same thing with anxiety. Anxiety can be really debilitating for some people. Got some anxiety going on right now out there. It can dampen your immune system. It can make you more reactive. It can make you less present with the people around you that you love and care about. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, if we're looking at those head to head, I would opt for feeling good, because when we get to the end of our life, what's really going to matter is that we created memories of high quality that we were happy with. Like, if we used a medication to create those memories that are pleasant for us to remember, I mean, okay. And we kept our family intact. We did all that we could do. Again, I'm not trying to push medications, but I'm just saying, if we're comparing those two options, it's not a bad option.
I totally agree. I have ADHD. I have never been formally diagnosed aside from you, being one of my best friends and, kind of telling me what's going on with my body. But it is incredibly distracting. Like, it's really difficult, and I can see this cycle. So I want to talk about ADHD because I know that this is a passion of yours. But for me personally, like, the idea of what's going on in my brain and there being a medication that could help was like, okay, I'm listening. So how talk to us about ADHD and how that all plays, because I'm wondering if there are a lot more people who are experiencing ADHD than they actually know that they have it.
Mm-hmm. Totally. And, for adults, what we're actually probably going to see for somebody who's never been diagnosed or never been tested is they actually come in with anxiety or depression, irritability. Maybe they have outbursts and they snap at their kids or their spouse or something, and they just are finally like, I don't know what's wrong. I have anxiety or depression. And kind of going through some root cause stuff, we kind of find out that they have trouble with staying on task, staying organized, prioritize. So with ADHD, let me back up a little bit. To put it simply, what happens is your mind is constantly receiving incoming data, right? We're talking, there's stuff going on outside, cars driving past, there's a clock on the wall, there's a dog on the ground, there's like constantly, your mind has all these things. And people who don't have ADHD, the mind is able to decipher easily what is priority data. And if you're talking to somebody, the mind knows, okay, these words that are coming out of this person's mouth is priority data, and it presents that priority right up front in your cognition. That's where we get our attention. In ADHD, the mind isn't as good at determining unconsciously what is priority data. So it's presenting all of the stimuli. It's presenting the clock on the wall. It's presenting the dog on the floor. It's presenting stuff outside. And the person is then left to consciously and with a lot of effort sift through all of this data and say, oh, this is what I need to focus on. Mind, no, not over there, not over there, I need to stay here.
Like, the glazing comes in when someone's talking to me and I'm just like, I'm looking and I'm trying so hard, but I can't. I don't know what you're saying.
No, because it's a conscious effort, and it's not even like, okay, I'm focused. It's moment by moment, because that focus, I mean, it's going to drift every moment. So you're constantly trying to do it. So yeah, it's I often get, a spouse that saying that their spouse is just fed up with them and not being able to pay attention and stay on task or whatever. But I have ADHD too, so I can understand that, it's not on purpose. I'm not meaning to not listen. It's a huge effort. I call it focusing on focusing, because
Wow.
that's what I do sometimes is when someone's talking, I almost have to memorize what they're saying and then kind of replay it after they're done talking. And I think it's kind of come a long way with admitting, publicly that I have ADHD, because I am also guilty of thinking of it as, maybe I'm not smart or I can't keep up, but that's not true. I have plenty of people that I know who are scholars with these huge academic achievements, and they have severe ADHD. So it's not about being smart. It's about being able to focus. In fact, if you have ADHD and you still can accomplish things, I mean, that's quite a feat, because you are up against your attention and trying to consciously direct that. It's kind of exhausting.
Totally. It's like this like never ending to-do lists everywhere, sticky notes, just like my notes in my phone are like full because
Yeah.
every like I was watching this thing on someone describing what ADHD is. They're like, it's not going like, oh, there's a squirrel. It's like walking somewhere and then being like, oh, I forgot I need to do this. Oh, and you'll start doing this. Oh, but then I need to, oh, it's
Mhm.
like that move. Here we go again. It's like that one book, like if you give a moose a muffin, like it just is like
Yeah.
this never ending, like, oh my God. And then it's like, how the fuck did I just get here? Like, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I was looking
Yeah.
for a pencil. And
So
now
there's three different types of ADHD. There's inattentive, hyperactive, and impulsive. So somebody could have one of each, combination of all three, or just kind of emphasize on one of those. So oftentimes it is a little, kind of a little stereotypical to say females are generally more of the inattentive type. So they often go undetected, because you have a young gal in, elementary school, and she's sitting in her chair behaving so good, staring at the front of this, classroom, but yet her mind is so all over the place. So it's really unfortunate that girls usually get diagnosed a lot later than boys, because boys tend to be a little more of the hyperactive. Not to say that, that's a hard, fast rule, but boys are usually a little more obvious, because they're the ones, bouncing up and down in their seat, not being able to sit down. And then we're like, oh, okay, this kid has an issue. So just because someone's not hyperactive doesn't mean that they don't have ADHD. So yeah, I mean, it is very undetected. It's not always debilitating, but it can be an issue, especially if we're talking about the impulsive um, domain of ADHD. If somebody has a tendency to be impulsive, well, that can be kind of a safety concern, especially if it's like a young teenager that's about to learn how to drive pretty soon. If it were my kid, I would want to make sure I had them tested and make sure that they don't have any of these tendencies. But that's just me.
I think too, I think one of the hurdles that, and I don't think it's just law enforcement, I think it's a lot of, I don't know. And I'm even kind of like hesitant to say more conservative people, but there's almost like this, like, oh, it's just for sissies. Like, oh, oh, it's kind of like that whole, like every kid gets a trophy kind of thing. Like there's something wrong with my child, or there's something wrong with their brain, whatever. And, and then there's this kind of more conservative outlook of like, no, you just like get it together and there's nothing wrong. And like, there's no need for
Mm-hmm.
medications. Is that,
Mm-hmm.
am I making that
Yeah.
up, or is that a thing?
Oh yeah, it's totally a thing. I mean, there's a stigma for we can go through every single, mental illness and talk about all the stigmas with it, and that's totally one. And um, you know, it's not like ADHD is that overtly obvious sometimes, or that debilitating to where people can't function. So what usually will happen is, maybe if a kid is undetected or untreated for whatever reason, they'll probably maybe they'll do okay depending on the severity of their ADHD, but they might develop a complex that they are not as smart or whatever as their peers because they need a little more assistance or they need a little more help or it takes them longer to grasp something. So then they end up developing, which was my case, oh man, I must not be smart because I'm needing all this special help. And that kind of turned into something, a little bit later that I had to deal with eventually. But I don't know. Some people do say just deal with it, and you can. I mean, you can. It's not like you have to be medicated if you have ADHD, but again, there's a spectrum of severity. If it's very severe, I've seen some pretty severe cases that we really really need to stabilize them and make them feel um, capable to make decisions in their body because they constantly are, even in like a conversation like this, they
Mhm.
would be, oh, and then talking about something totally different. So it's hard for them to even socialize, to have complete their um, academic goals that they have for themselves or whatever.
I feel okay. So you said something earlier that kind of like triggered like a familiar feeling in me is because of something that was happening in your brain or in your body, like it made you then think negatively and identify negatively towards yourself. And is that how like unwellness kind of starts to develop and you start going in that cycle of like now we're introducing more depressive emotions to the body and then there's like this and like you were saying
Mhm.
depression is something that really breaks down the body. Is that how that works?
Yeah, so kind of going back to what I was saying earlier is that as adults, what I'll see if it is like an underlying cause of ADHD is they'll come in with anxiety and depression because that's what it will roll into eventually once this kid goes through the
Mhm.
system. So ADHD is, again, you can manage, but the way that our education system is set up, it is not ideal for somebody that has trouble with priority data, incoming stimuli, sitting in a desk trying to listen to a lecture. That's like worst case scenario for someone with focus. So they'll yeah, they might pass, but eventually it's going to catch up to them.
That's interesting. You also have an area of focus that I know that you've been working on, depression. That is something that I think is experienced a lot in law enforcement. And I don't know that officers would necessarily be like, I'm depressed, but being like having a tendency to isolate, feeling like those really low, how your body introduces hormones to counterbalance the really high surges of adrenaline and cortisol and whatever that your body goes through. I want to talk about that. Hypervigilance is a huge thing that, I mean, pretty much every officer knows that they experience that. That's just part of the job. But it's that dip that what I've come to find is that it's in that dip that your body needs to go through in order for it to like get back to a balanced state that you start to feel again, you start identifying yourself to these low feelings and thinking of yourself as being depressive or there being something wrong with you. Talk about how all of that works. How did you get into depression and understand that stuff?
So for depression, it's not always feeling sad and lonely and all of that. There actually have several phases of depression, and one of them is just not being interested in the things that you used to be interested in. Call it anhedonia, where you're just kind of
Oh,
like anhedonia when you don't want to kind of go out and do it. You kind of lose that zest for life. You don't might be like,
mhm.
no, I'm not sad. I'm just don't want to do anything. There's also one of the phases of depression is just irritability. Someone's generally just irritable, not necessarily sad. It's not. I don't want to make it sound like you have to be sad to be depressed. It comes out in many ways. Um, Usually depression is going to impact your sleep. That's going to be one of the main things. So someone's going to either have insomnia, difficult time initiating sleep. Maybe they're waking up frequently throughout the night. There's actually sleep
Wow.
studies done on people who have depression, and their REM cycles are completely abnormal compared to somebody who doesn't have depression. It's really interesting to see that your body is just kind of responding that way.
Why?
Well, again, you're touching on it earlier, it has a lot to do with your hormonal balance and not being regulated there. And honestly, I'm going to say that I'm not totally sure why it does that, but I know that you naturally are supposed to release a certain amount of melatonin in your mind at night when you're getting ready for bed. And a lot of that gets kind of screwy.
Does it like, is it like serotonin turns into melatonin? Isn't there like a chemical process or something like that? Or like melatonin is present when serotonin is present and that's affected by depression, right? Is that how they all
Yeah.
come together?
Yeah, I mean, I like to talk about it as like this big soup, and there's a lot of the chemicals affect the other ones. So it's quite an oversimplification to say,
Mhm.
you know, that way. And honestly, I'm not up to speed on my sleep study stuff, but I do know that it does impact that. Um, so that's a huge thing though, because that could also lead to worsening depression over time, right? If somebody's not getting proper sleep.
Yeah.
Um, and then a lot of times, speaking about police officers and what they experience, they're going to have nightmares usually, and if they've seen traumatic things, and that's a big deal too, because what happens is most of us who aren't traumatized really look forward to going to bed at night, and we
Yeah.
just think about our bed all day, and then we
Yeah.
go to sleep, and that's somebody who's been traumatized. That is like hellish to think about. Oh my god, it's almost bedtime and I'm going to have to lay there with my thoughts. And
Mm.
that's often why we'll see insomnia, because going to sleep can be a scary thing, because that's when all the shit comes out. So maybe they'll turn to alcohol or some other substance to try to chill things out. And obviously, we could talk about that at length of how problematic that could end up being. But that's, yeah, it's kind of, again, a big chemistry soup going on that causes a lot of issues with sleep.
It's so wild to me. Like, I feel like I've kind of turned this new leaf and just sort of having like this 10,000-foot view of how cycles work. And it just seems like so often, like when we're introduced to trauma and officers, you don't get the fucking choice. Like your entire job is to be introduced to trauma all day long. So it's like when you're constantly being exposed to trauma and those hormones, and if you can't sleep or you're avoidant, because like when you're dreaming, your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and dreaming. You still feel emotions, which is why we fucking wake up and we're like, oh my God, was that fucking real? Like, oh, that felt so real. Like, or I could woken up crying before, like shit like shakes you up. And
Yeah.
then it's like if you're not sleeping well, like that affects your how you interpret cues, right? And how does if you misinterpret somebody as being threatening, how does that increase your threat response? How does that escalate a situation? How does escalating a situation create more stress for you or more paperwork for you or job insecurity? Like all these things are just like it's like a fucking tornado. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, we just need to like step outside of that cycle, which is why I think there needs to be. I want to get into the more holistic things that we can do to kind of offset some of those things. But I really think when it comes to a cycle that's in this heavy of a I don't want to rotation. I don't know this much momentum that's going. I think that in order to pump the brakes and really like shift gears and get out of that cycle, I feel like medication is like a really kind of like invasive, but like necessary way for some people to get out of that.
Oh
No,
yeah. Oh
it's
yeah. And that when I first meet somebody, that's something we talk about and go over is how severe are they symptoms. Again, by the time somebody makes it to my office, they're kind of this is all they got. This is their last ditch effort. They are up against, life. And it's not like they come to me early on. Early on, there's a lot of things that you can do, but if we're talking about, PTSD and nightmares, I mean, you can work with that with some therapy, but sometimes you need a little help, and the medications are meant to provide some relief while somebody is undergoing therapy. These medications aren't meant always, not necessarily, but for PTSD, not supposed to be like some lifelong treatment. Just the therapy for PTSD is very difficult, um, for the body to process. It's a mind body experience. And we need to give the body a little break while the mind is trying to work through and process some of that trauma to put it in a safe place. Because you brought up hypervigilance. And the way I like to describe it is trauma is when the mind experiences something traumatizing. And I don't care how muscle man you are or muscle woman you are and what you've experienced and what your job expects you to put up with. If you've been exposed to something that is not cool, like you come up on a scene, even something that you would not really expect to cause PTSD. Maybe, you see someone, oh, with their arm just blown off. I mean, that is traumatizing, but if you're kind of expecting it, maybe that's not that traumatizing for you. I don't know. Anyway, if you experience something, your mind takes that memory and it kind of just holds on to it. And it's like, I have this memory. I don't know what to do with it because it's not normal. It's not like my everyday, like going home to the kids and playing Candyland. It's like I have this thing and I don't know what to do with it. And then the mind just sits with it because the person, often, if it develops into PTSD, they won't process it. They won't sit there and kind of go over it. They'll try to like avoid it, be like, oh, okay, that was really fucked up. I don't want to go there. That's where we see some of the nightmares come out, because when you go into your sleep mode, your subconscious kind of takes over and your brain is trying to integrate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your brain's trying to integrate and heal all of the memories from the day and like bring it into this nice, like settled, again, like I use the word soup, just bring everything really together and balance it all out. And then it just kind of has this thing and it keeps firing it at you. Like that's what the symptoms of hypervigilance and nightmares, that's your mind and your body's way of saying there is something that is not okay here, and I need to figure out what to do with this memory. And it sits in an area nearby the amygdala, which is your fight or flight response. So that's just a very hypersensitive area in general if we're dealing with trauma. And so hypervigilance, or maybe reacting a little bit more aggressively or having an outburst, those are where we see some of the symptoms of PTSD. If somebody comes in and tells me they've had angry outbursts or nightmares, that's usually the first thing I'll try to investigate is PTSD.
Okay. I like that it's going this direction, because I also sent this to you. I'm telling you guys, some of these, it's really wild, our misinformation. Okay. We have a lot of misinformation about our own health. Okay. I have an anonymous officer that completed the survey, and I asked the question, have you experienced the following? And this person selected yes to the following. I have isolation, um, outbursts of anger, shortened temper, depression, violent thoughts towards others, obsessive thinking, paranoia, adrenaline fatigue, chronic stomach pain, insomnia, shallow breathing, chronic back pain, excessive alcohol use, hypervigilance, muscular tension, persistent negative beliefs. And then I asked, how would you rate your mental health on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being I'm at risk, 1 being I'm content? They said a 4. That to me, that sounds like an awful experience. How is there such a big disconnect between what we're experiencing and how we've like normalized that, like this is okay, and then what we tell ourselves that we're okay?
Yeah. And, you know, I that's one of the things I also talk to people about is I'm assessing, obviously their symptoms, but I'm also assessing their level of insight. How insightful are you to how bad off you are? Because I like to paint the analogy of like depression, PTSD, anxiety, whatever it is. It's kind of like you're in this deep, dark hole and you just keep going down and down and down. And if you're down far enough, you don't know how far you are. And some people are like, yeah, whatever. Don't want to be alive anymore, but whatever.
Yeah.
And, you know, in those cases, I have to tell people, look, you're just going to have to trust me. I know that you think you're probably okay, but you're going to have to trust me and know that I'm telling you, you're not okay. And this is not okay. And that's really hard. I don't use that very often because I feel like that's a lot to ask somebody to say, you don't totally understand how much suffering you're experiencing. And I've only been talking to them for 15, 30 minutes maybe. And I've already kind of concluded that they're like, they're like, I'm okay. They're in there for, maybe insomnia or something otherwise. So that's huge to figure out, because you don't know where to go or how to get out of it if you don't know where you're at in the first place.
Is that where we kind of see some of the stories where you're just like, I don't know how this person committed suicide. Like they were so happy, like everything was fine. Is that how we kind of see some of that stuff? Like people are fine and happy 1 second because they don't really know where they're at on that spectrum of like unhealth.
Yeah, I mean, that might have, I can't speak to that entirely because obviously we don't know what they ended up doing and or what their reasons were. Um, I'm over 99%. So like 99 point, I don't know, 7% of the time, if somebody comes in suicidal, they haven't even dabbled into the mental health realm of like treatment and medications and what they can do. It's again, that's where we're like, why would you suffer that severely and that long when there are so many options available? So yeah, it just seems like using medications as a last effort is really unfortunate. And I can't tell you how many people that have come to me not wanting to be alive, and we started them on a low dose of some medication and got them the treatment they needed. Within months, they're like, I kind of don't want to die anymore. Like, that's huge. That's a really
That's
big deal. You
huge.
obviously you don't want to die anymore when 3 months ago you were at the end of your freaking rope. It, it's
Mhm.
if somebody is still depressed, still suicidal, and they're on a medication, it's either not the right medication, it's not working for them. Again, over 99% of the time, people have not tried all there is to try. You need to go to a psychiatry specialist and talk to somebody who understands his medications. So a lot of times people will just go to their primary care doctor and be like, yeah, I'm having some anxiety, some depression. Primary care will give them just a regular antidepressant, and it'll just be like, it'll kind of maybe work, but maybe not the right medication for their chemistry entirely. And they'll just kind of deal with it. They'll be like, well, I started a med, I did what. But if you're still depressed and still suicidal, you need to step it up and actually, make an appointment and look into that, because there are so many options available. And again, it's not to say it's always medication or that it's always going to be lifelong medication. Sometimes, again, just medication, starting that med to provide you with that insight, again, to understand where you're at and how far down you're actually going. Get some awareness of that, and then you can kind of get your own self healing underway. So, and going back before we change subjects too much about having nightmares, there's this really cool medication called Prazosin. It's actually a high blood pressure medication, and we will use this med at night. Doesn't necessarily cause the low blood pressure dips or anything, especially if somebody has a normal blood pressure. So we're not using it for blood pressure, but if you use it before you go to bed at night, it actually calms the body down while you sleep. And if you do have a nightmare, that adrenaline surge that wakes you up and is so intense of all that norepinephrine, the body's not going to respond to it. So the nice thing about a medication like this, it's as needed. Obviously you talk to your whoever who's going to give it to you, but it's as needed. And we're not talking about some serotonin medication that people are really worried about starting a daily medication for that. So that one's super cool. I've seen some really impressive turnarounds with that med. Not everybody, some people don't like it, but most often it's a great option for people to, again, getting that quality of sleep at night is going to make a huge impact of how you feel. And then not being afraid of going to sleep, because again, that's what we see with PTSD. They're afraid to sleep or they're using alcohol.
Avoiding it.
Um, and then just having something like, okay, I mean, if you're just wanting to like maybe, dabble in the medication realm just a little bit, that's an awesome option. You could just use as needed. And you're not like totally joining the medication train.
I've a common theme that it seems like we're talking about is like needing to reframe a lot of the way that some of these things have been presented. You said something at the beginning of the conversation, depression isn't always blah, 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 blah. And I am also finding the same thing about suicide. Suicide is not always, I'm going to kill myself. It can also start off or be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, because I want to be sensitive to people, but like, I don't want to live. I don't want to live. Like,
Mhm.
I don't, I kind
Yeah,
of
and
feel
that's
towards
something
life.
that I ask about too is, suicide. Is it just you want to kill yourself and you have a plan and you are going to go do it, or you just don't want to be alive anymore? We call that passive suicidality. So you're like, I just am disappointed I woke up today. That's obviously different than someone saying, I'm going to go find a gun and do something dangerous with it or something. So that's still obviously not okay, you know?
Passive suicidality. I think that right there, that feels like more of what I have experienced. I mean, I've spent time with thousands of officers over my career, and that is something that I hear more candidly when we're drinking and hanging out and we're talking about problems, is just I get the sense of like, I don't really want to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And not like I'm gonna go fucking kill, like I've only met one officer that told me that, like, he had a gun in his mouth. But the other officers where I've been like, okay, this isn't, there's more to life and I want to help you get there. That's more of what I'm hearing, is just kind of like this giving up and like, this is just how life is going to be. And honestly, I don't really blame a lot of people. Like, if your experience is this constant, like, you wake up and you're not happy that you have another day of the bullshit that you had the day before. I actually spoke with an officer out of Georgia the other day, and she was saying at the end of the day, you laid down and you're just like, my entire day was shit. Like, every bit of my day was interacting with people and their shittiest days. All of their shitty day makes my day shitty. So I'm just laying in bed feeling like I had a shitty day. So if that's your experience with the world, like,
Was this somebody on medication? Just wondering.
she I don't know. We didn't get into conversation about medication. She was just
So that's kind of my thing. If that's how you're feeling and you're on a medication, it's not working.
mm,
So if you're not on a medication, maybe it would benefit you to, again, if we're talking about quality of life and feeling that horrible every day, that is worse on the body than taking a medication. I mean, I know a lot of these medications have a stigma, but it's really unfortunate because these medications are, millions of people take these meds and they're supposed to be really helpful. Kind of one of the best things that's ever happened to the field of psychiatry is there's a way for you to feel better. I mean, you don't have to feel shitty every day. There's a way. Again, not always pushing medications, but if we're talking about someone not wanting to be alive any longer, I don't know. There aren't a lot of natural remedies that I found that have evidence base behind them that I would feel comfortable utilizing. Because again, by the time someone comes to me, we're kind of past a lot of those natural things. We have to be aggressive and get somebody out of that spot, because why waste any more time? I mean, you're wasting days and years and memories.
yeah. Okay, so then let's talk about some of the more natural ways that we can, like you said, by the time people get to you, they're like, fuck,
Yeah.
or their
Yeah.
family's like, this motherfucker. So I talk about it. What are some things that we can do? What are some steps, some supplements, things that we can be doing to,
Yeah.
yeah.
And I love that question because imagine this podcast is for a lot of people who haven't gone to psychiatry yet. So being preventative and staying on top of your mental health is really going to avoid you going into psychiatry in the first place. So, all of the things that we know about, right? Exercising, not like hardcore pumping iron or anything, but even just going on a walk. The studies actually show that 15 minutes of walking a day is just as effective as some of these antidepressant medications. And that's so simple. So take your dogs on a walk, 15 minutes a day outside, get some vitamin D. Make sure if you're, indoors all day or in a vehicle all day, you are at least seeing maybe the sunrise or sunset and getting some sun exposure during the day with as much as your skin as you can, feel comfortable letting out into the sun. Because vitamin D is huge. That's another thing that is, especially in Arizona, we think we're in Arizona, we get plenty of sun. Actually, no, we're indoors a lot. So often our vitamin D is way too low, and that's really going to impact how we feel. I have given somebody very high doses of vitamin D when their vitamin D was nearly nothing. And that did more than any antidepressant we had tried. So that was pretty impressive. Also, supplementing with zinc has been shown to be really helpful for mood. Fish oils are fantastic. Again, these aren't things that might save the day, but if we're talking about mild cases, then it's really going to help significantly. So
I've been taking zinc for the last few days because of whatever cold this is.
Yeah.
And last night I was laying in bed, and I'm always very mindful of these moments, because as much as I talk about mental health, I still have my own, or the importance of mental health, I still have my own journey that I'm navigating of depressive feelings and finding ways of how that fits in. And so I take note when I'm able to lay in bed and have this sense of peace around me and feel completely content with just being in the space that I'm in without any stimuli. And last night was one of those nights. I just laid there looking around the room, totally content. I have been taking so much zinc.
That's awesome. Now, was that a conscious effort you made to get there, or did it just kind of was just there?
It was just there. I did not, because I will make those conscious moments for myself, because I know it's really important to find those, or I'll make conscious effort to smile, this big exuberant smile by myself, or hug myself, because I don't want to, I want to make sure that I am doing that for myself rather than having something else cause me to feel that way. I find that important.
And I love that. And I feel like that right there is enlightenment, right? If we're able to choose our feelings and choose how we want to be in that moment, overcoming our emotions, that's really what we're up against here. And not to say, if somebody is severely depressed, family history, they've been dealing with it for years, that's not necessarily what I'm talking about. There are obvious chemical imbalances that we can see on scans and autopsies that these people significantly have different brains that we can tell. So if you're up against a chemistry imbalance, but that's not always the case. That's, I don't know. I don't even want to say a percentage, but more often than not, it's definitely that ability to navigate what emotion we want to be at. And that's just huge. So of course things are going to come at us. People are going to piss us off and make us angry, and situations are going to happen. And then choosing what we want to be and how we want to feel is huge. I've been giving my patients some exercises to do lately that, think about what emotion you want to feel and be really specific, not just happy. They say, I want to be happy. I'm like, well, even people who aren't depressed aren't walking around happy. They're just chill. They're content. They're feel all right. People aren't overly happy all the time. So just finding maybe what you said, that contentment, that peace, and just thinking about what that feels like and bringing words or bringing life to those words. So how you kind of described it a little bit, like harmonizing, integrating, just feeling gratitude or whatever it is, even if you're not there, and just thinking about what it means to be there. Maybe a 10-minute practice every day is going to make you feel a heck of a lot better. Instead of just sitting there in your loathing, misery, and just letting that take over. I mean, that's when we see people come into the psychiatry office when they aren't keeping their emotions in check year after year.
That is super true. So at the end of, I mean, helping people, giving people suggestions on the emotions that I think are good for the body to feel. That's like a
Mhm.
common theme when I teach yoga is I want you to smile on the inside. And I know it's like one of those like really weird things to say, especially to police officers. I know that you guys that are listening are like, what the fuck? But honestly, getting your brain to remember that it has access to those different types of emotions too. Like we can't forget that there's this whole spectrum and we may be feeling more on the negative end of the spectrum, but our brain still has the ability to feel all of those other things, which is why when we
Mhm.
watch movies or, comedies or horror movies, we know that our brain can do it. That's why we fucking like to watch that shit. So it's such a good practice to get your body to feel good, safe feelings. Like it's not, it may be like a sissy la la move, if you're not used to it, but like your body needs to remember that it can do that shit, or else if you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's a sissy move at all. Again, going back to like that's it's in my what I understand about enlightenment, that is the definition of enlightenment is there's shit around you, things are chaotic and falling apart, and you're able to stay harmonized internally. You're able to pick and choose how you feel. You're not susceptible, you're not so easily influenced. I mean, maybe a little bit, we're all gonna do something here and there, but that we can go back to that space that we are choosing to feel. That right there is, I mean, that's huge. That's really what I would think about would be the biggest accomplishment that I can make in my life is choosing what emotion I want to feel. And we can, I know that we don't like always talking about emotions, but that's really what it comes down to. And I almost feel like psychiatry, mental health, nurse practitioner, that's not as descriptive as I think it should be. It's really about emotional well being. Because people come into me because they feel depressed, they feel anxious. Nobody just is. I mean, you got to, that is the experience, it's how we feel. And that's really what it comes down to is creating an emotional experience that we can say that we're okay with.
Gotta be your own little like witch doctor. I saw this thing on TikTok the other day and my mind was blown. So it was this mom and she was recording herself and she's like, I was just getting ready to organize all the spices in my pantry. And then my toddler just asked if she could help. And so she goes, give me a second. I need to recalibrate so that I can take my expectation from goal oriented task to relationship building activity. And she's like, give me a moment. And you could like see her wheels turning where she was trying to like get herself to like switch. And then she said, and now I have to grieve the results that I am no longer going to achieve. Give me another second. And she's like, and now I'm ready to spend time just loving on my child. And I was like, holy shit.
Yeah.
What?
So somebody that is going back to the ADHD again, if somebody has ADHD, a mom having ADHD, and they are hyper focused on a task, can you imagine the soul disruption
Yeah.
that would cause? It's not that easy to just say, let me break this down for myself. It's like, no, your mind was set on a thing and then redirecting that causes a lot of stress. And that's where we see a lot of the outbursts that come from ADHD. I love how she was able to do that. But I remember you asked me a question early on and we never got to it, was how does Ritalin affect the body?
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so just briefly, what Ritalin, Adderall, Vyvanse do is they increase the levels of dopamine in certain areas of the brain that are in charge of executive functioning, problem solving, task completion, and all that, which is things that are disrupted for ADHD. And those areas of the brain actually have a deficiency. So it creates that awareness there. There is a possibility, I guess. I mean, we are talking about chemistry, and usually, if we're giving a medication, the chemistry is beneficial for the person and it's favorable and it is creating that experience for the person they need to. But once in a while, the chemistry might not be favorable. If this was a person, and going your example about the officer that was charged, which is really unfortunate, it's a person that's experienced with these medications. I mean, they know how it affects them, and I wouldn't be quick to say that that would cause aggression, but I don't know the whole situation with the case. More often than not, it causes the ability to be focused and present, and actually usually calmer for people. Um, that have the inattentive or maybe hyperactive presentation. But if we're talking about the impulsive presentation, or impulsive and just hyperactive, a stimulant med could actually cause them to be a little more aggressive. So there are different medications that we use for those presentations that calm person down, calm down their body, not necessarily are causing putting a stimulant in their mind to enhance the dopamine, but it calms the body down so that the body feels less compelled to, you know, pursue an impulse or be hyperactive. So, yeah, they could cause aggression if it's the wrong type of symptoms.
And I feel like there's so many fucking variables to just that one thing. Like so many things just popped into my head going like, okay, so I know just from our relationship and what you've told me that like when your psychiatrist or your doctor puts you on a medication, it's not like one and done all the time. Like there's this process of like, this isn't working. Let's try things. So if that officer is on medication, like, was that medication effective for that officer? Was that officer routine on their checkups? Was this officer coming and getting that medication when it was
Yeah.
like last resort? This officer, if they're involved in a shooting, they're going to be in fight or flight. So how that takes over. So there's so many variables, and there's also so many like ways in which there are. The fact of the matter is there's going to be a lot of attorneys who will go for really shitty arguments that'll try and make you seem like a fucking crazy person or whatever. There are lots of different factors that go into this, but when it comes to the likelihood of that happening versus the likelihood of you having this really shitty experience, they're not anywhere comparable. So I feel like
No.
to take these sort of like one-off situations that have like hundreds of variabilities that are playing into it and restrict oneself from seeking medical intervention that will likely change their experience with life, it doesn't feel like it makes sense to use that example.
Yeah, and that's a really shitty situation. Obviously, I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but just, I mean, that could go either way. You could be like, well, this person did this behavior because they weren't medicated and they have ADHD and they should have been
Right.
medicated. Like,
Right.
you can't win.
You
It's
can't
not like
so like you
you're
might
just
as well enjoy yourself a little bit and try and
yeah.
like
Yeah.
take your
But I
life.
like what you're saying about, keep going in with those checkups, because with psychiatry, there's no blood test we can do to say, oh, this is what you have and this is the medication that's going to work for you. It's a little bit of trial and error, and we'll figure it out eventually. You just got to kind of stick with the process and you'll find something that helps. But something really cool that my practice has, some practices do, it's this ADHD test. So you sit at this computer screen and you have to sit really still, and it flashes these shapes in front of you, and you have to click a button when it is two consecutive shapes in a row. So it's measuring your reaction time, it's measuring your ability to stay focused and on task, it's measuring your ability to sit still, and at the end it will generate a score of inattentive, hyperactive, impulsive. You get a percentile in each of those, and we do that as at a baseline without any medication, and then we'll put somebody on a medication, and then we'll retest them once we find the right med, and you can actually see these numbers improve significantly. So like impulsivity, if that officer happened to have his impulsivity score baseline before starting medication, and then after starting medication, it would show like, no, actually see how less impulsive I am with this medication. And I'm actually in no standard deviations away from what's normal with my impulsivity. So that would have been his argument right there. I mean, I don't know. That's just, I'm no lawyer,
That
but
is
that's what I would
so
have thought.
good. That's really, I think that right there is, I think that that's what people like. I don't know where the word hall pass came into my mind because it has nothing to do with that. But like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's like your doctor's note of like, no. See, like it's helped. Like, here's the
Yeah.
data on
Yeah.
why.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, I want to go back to natural things that we can be doing. We talked about exercise, how that's important. Are there certain types of foods? And I know that you and I have talked about um, smells and
Mhm.
environment, stuff like that.
Mhm.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So I think aromatherapy is so underplayed out there in the mental health realm. But it is one of the most influential scents that we have that we don't give enough credit to. I mean, how often have you gone somewhere and you smelt something and it took you back into this memory that just you were alive in it again? You were like totally there, a memory that you had no concept of, that you never would have reached otherwise. Smells are so impactful. So creating pleasant smells, not necessarily like, fumigating the place, but maybe you use peppermint oil quite a bit. I've noticed, and I love that. That's a really great kind of a recalibration of where you're at with, how you're feeling. Peppermint oil is awesome. And I actually don't have a ton of evidence-based stuff that I can present with that, other than that it does influence how we feel. So just being aware, even in your home environment, just being aware if like you kind of walk in the house and you're like a little disgruntled, like just think, is this place well lit? And am I smells that around me, are they pleasant? Is it annoying? Like, just try to go down all of those sensory experiences and just see if all of them are pleasant for you to experience. And if not, maybe shift that up a little bit so that you're not up against already feeling disgruntled subconsciously before you're even able to, decide how you want to feel.
Smells are okay. So I have, when I do my one-on-ones with officers and I'm doing trigger release therapy,
Mhm.
I intentionally use a certain oil. It's a blend that
Mhm.
I got from doTERRA. It's called Elevation. And I
Mhm.
use it because my goal is to hijack to take that body over, right? Because when we're in fight or flight, you mentioned it, that amygdala, and they call it the amygdala hijack, because your body just takes over and it sends you into this like mode of like operating and doing and thinking subconsciously or unconsciously. And so my goal with using this oil is for us to consciously take a hold of that and go like, no, we're safe,
Mhm.
because my goal is to make you feel better, feel present, right? So it's so, I believe in this shit hard, hard. Officers, I know half of your fucking wives sell this shit. I know someone at your church, someone at your department, someone that you know has access to essential oils. It's no longer hippy dippy weird shit. We got sciences and shit. Okay.
I love it. It doesn't even need to be a belief. Like, you don't even need to believe it or not believe. Like, it is well documented. Like, this has been like, I can't even tell you, I mean, thousands of years it's been documented that smells really impact how we feel. Like, they're so influential. There's no argument there. Like, there's nobody that can be like, no, it's just no. Like, read a
Yeah.
little.
And it's one of those things where like you don't have to feel like doing stuff, right? Like you don't, when your body is in the practice of feeling a certain negative ways or feeling certain negative things, you're not going to wake up and be like, "Oh, you know what I'm going to do for myself today?" But you have to just do it. This is where discipline and self-control comes into play, where I have post-it notes on my window, literally everywhere that I go, to tell myself what I'm going to do, because I know that it's going to be good for my mental health and my well-being if I do them. Whether I feel like it made a difference or not, in the long run, if I continue doing these things over and over and over and over again, I'll eventually develop habits and routines, and my brain will eventually get in the habit of feeling more on that positive end of the spectrum. And then I get involved in that cycle of like seeing the world in a different lens. And I know that I have this privilege of not interacting with the world's trauma every fucking hour. So I know that, but this is why it's important for you to take control of your own mental health and do these things for it.
Yeah. And, something that is also really under appreciated is the placebo effect, right? Like, that's a real effect. You're like, oh, it's just placebo. No, that your body is responding to a sugar pill and it's creating the same experience as an antidepressant. So that goes back to like the power of belief. And, you know, I'm not speaking from a religious or spiritual aspect or anything, but that alone has shown to do so much for somebody's body and for their mental well-being. In fact, when I meet somebody and they're at their complete wits end and I just say, "Oh, you haven't tried A, B, and C," and I can see the installation of hope in their body, like their soul awakens because like, "Oh, there's hope for me." Like hope is medicine. So just knowing that there's probably something you haven't tried and there are ways that it could get better. So if somebody comes to me and they're suicidal and like, "Oh, you haven't heard of this, this, and this, you haven't heard of ketamine infusions, you haven't heard of, you know, these types of medications or looking into doing this," like, no. I'm like, yeah. So sometimes just hope alone is all people need, that belief, to just get them moving in the right direction. And that's so underappreciated.
Yeah. You are definitely very good at providing hope and just being like this neutral voice to people's anguish that they're going through. So I very much appreciate that about you. You talk about like the power of hope. I fucking love Dr. Joe Dispenza. He blows my fucking mind. And I just like one of the things that he had posted this small video about if you want to be if you want to be wealthy, then you can't accept lack. And he goes, and if you want to be healthy, then you can't accept fear. And I was like, what? What the fuck? And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, oh man, like I've had this journey of like herniated discs for years, since back in the fucking CrossFit days, you know, when we used to fucking kick it there. And every morning I wake up looking for that pain, looking for that fear that tells me that I'm going to feel whatever, right? So when I set my feet on the ground and I go to stand up, I'm waiting for myself to feel that back pain. I'm anticipating it. And any place that you make room for in your mind will fill it. So like when I go to sneeze and I'm waiting for it to hurt my back, right? Versus like telling my mind. And so I literally started just deciding that I wasn't going to be doing these things. Like when I wake up in the morning, there's not going to be any pain there. It took a long time until I got to a place where I could get out of bed without my back hurting. I didn't do anything different. Literally not fucking anything different. And then I'm just like, who is this fucking witch doctor person? What? And then it was like, no, your mind has so much power to decide. Like when people when they reach out to me and they're like, oh, I injured my back and I did whatever. I'm like, a huge part of your recovery is going to be you not letting in fear. So if you injure yourself, your brain, neuroplasticity, its ability to like grow and create new pathways and new ways of thinking, it works in good ways and in bad. So if you hurt yourself and you're like, oh my God, is it going to be like this forever? Like, am I going to be able to do, you start going through like these patterns of thinking and like obsessing and worrying and fearing, which create all of these different fight or flight responses and chemical reactions inside of your body, which then make your recovery more difficult and prolong
Totally.
it. It's fucking
Yeah.
wild.
I feel like I can't even speak to that. I've never dealt with chronic pain. I mean, I've had pain here and there, but I can't even begin to empathize or even understand what that would be like to have that. But I do know that, in addition to some medications that have been shown, antidepressant medications actually have been shown to be helpful for some chronic pain. But also, like what you said, mindfulness is really the best medicine for that. Like just kind of coming to some sort of radical acceptance of like, okay, this is my body and this is what I'm working with and this is what I got to do. And that's really going to do you so much better than a lot of these medications, because then again, you're expecting the medication to like help you out. You're like, this med is it's gonna do it. It's gonna do it for me. And if it's not, you're doing that same thing. You're getting out of bed like, oh, do I feel it? Is this med helping? As opposed to just being like, no, I'm doing it. I'm just gonna live my life still.
Yeah, which goes back to the whole thing. Like when you're deep enough in that hole, it may be difficult for you to take ownership and to decide, nope, I'm not doing that anymore. So this is
Yeah.
where that kind of like huge pump the brake, where you get out of that cycle of like negativity and depression and all the things that are associated with that. Sometimes medications, exercise, foods. Oh, we didn't talk about food. Are there foods?
Oh yeah. You know, you can eat shitty and you're going to feel shitty. No doubt. Like,
So like going to
seriously.
QT and having fucking energy
Like,
all shift long and coffee all day long and like,
hey, you're talking about medication. You're just medicating yourself. Energy drinks and caffeine, that's medicine. So people are medicating themselves with energy drinks and caffeine. Caffeine is like one of the most legal, it's a drug, right? It's a stimulant drug. So it's okay to drink coffee, but it's not okay to take a medication because that's, you know, comes from a pharmacy or something. Just want to throw that out there. But yes, eating shitty, you will, of course, I mean, I don't think we even need to like emphasize that. People know if they eat shitty, they're going to feel shitty. So try going on some sort of, you know, Mediterranean diet has a lot of evidence behind that. Maybe some modified keto diets. There's a brain diet, and that's not like diet to say. It's just not eating shitty foods, not eating stuff that has a 5-year shelf life. You know, in a package that you're. I mean, that's not a meal. So feeding your body in the right way, it's gonna feel a lot better.
you hear what she said, you guys? She said to eat some fucking gyros. That's what I'm gonna do. Fucking, we're gonna go eat some halal
Hummus.
food tonight. Hell yeah!
Yes. Oh my god, I love Mediterranean food.
Oh, I found this
Love it.
joint, dude. We're gonna have to go hit it up. It's like the
Yeah.
most tender lamb. Oh my god, and like
Yes.
so much garlic and onion. I
Yeah.
couldn't even talk. I was embarrassed to talk to people for the rest of the day. It was
I wonder if the Mediterranean diet, if that includes the baklava, because that has to happen. So
it
that
does.
makes me feel better. I don't know if it's in the diet, but I feel better. So I'm going to go with it.
Thank you so much for joining me. I know that I've been trying to get you for a long time. And so I'm glad that we finally got a chance to like chat about some of the stuff.
And I just want to say, like, I love what you're doing. I think what you're doing, you are humanizing police officers. Like, you're reminding the public that, hey, these are people and these people have mental health needs and we need to support them. They're members of our community.
Mhm.
And not only you're a Black female, so bringing that light and creating this kind of, you're like a medium, you know, like one of those, like you speak to this side and you speak to that side. Like, you are so trusting for people like me and the citizens to look to you. And then you have that connection with the police officers. I'm like, nobody freaking better. Nobody better. Like, I'm so impressed that I know you. I just love, love, love what you're doing. And it's so needed right now. So thank you. Oh my God. Thank you for what you're doing. Truly.
I love you.
I mean, it'd be such a different message, right? I mean, not to, you know, stereotype, but if it was like an older white dude that was like, "Hey, everybody," like it would just be just a different
Yeah.
energy behind it. And I just,
Yeah.
it's you. You need to do this for us. So thank you for bringing us together like this.
Yeah, man. I'm excited. It's only gonna like again cycles. Like I see I see this, and it's not that I live in this world of like everything is like rainbows. Well, I kind of do, but to me, it's going like I I think that there are very real and practical steps that if everybody within your own individual space within a community are able to take some ownership and responsibility and heal and like recover a little bit. You said something earlier about like giving your body a break. If we can find that space to create some healing, I 100% believe that things can be totally different. I'm not saying that the world is going to be like kumbaya and whatever, but I believe that things can absolutely be different, like drastically different. And I've
Totally.
seen it.
Yeah.
It's not impossible.
Right. And it's not about, you know, let's defund the police and that's going to make everything better. And it's not about, you know, let's keep rioting. Like, that's not the answer. Like, I feel like what you're bringing to the table and we're like, hey, let's heal some shit. Let's create some unity here. Like, that's the freaking answer. You know, obviously the other shit's not going to work. It hasn't worked.
Mm-mm. No, dude, totally. Okay, you guys, if you want to get in contact with McKenna, if you want to follow what she is up to, head over to her Instagram page. It is psychiatry underscore MP underscore. You want to follow her. You want to see what she's up to. You want to pay attention, send her some DMs. Follow along, man. Learn some new shit. McKenna, thank you. You're amazing.
Love you.
Love you.